Good morning, everyone. My name is Donisha Smith, and I lead the Center for Financial Empowerment within the county's Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. The CFE, as we call it, works to improve the financial health of low to moderate income county residents by building the capacity of local service providers, advocating for systemic changes and increased consumer financial protections, and convening cross-sector partners to facilitate collaboration and synergy across the field. Thank you so much for joining our session today. Just a quick programming note, we encourage you to post your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to address those questions during the presentation and during our Q&A period at the end of the session. In May of this year, we hosted a discussion with representatives from FreeFrom to help frontline staff at nonprofit organizations and county departments understand the specific financial capability needs of gender-based violence survivors. We are pleased to come back with this session today to continue that conversation and explore the specific role that financial institutions can play to support the financial health of survivors. We have three great speakers for you today. The first is George Cerda, our very own program associate here in the Center for Financial Empowerment. George has been with the CFE since we launched in 2016. He was recently designated as our Bank on LA County project lead, where he will work with the CFE Fund, local nonprofit organizations, county departments, and financial institutions to promote Bank on account access to county residents and seek collaboration opportunities to raise awareness about the program. George also facilitates our financial capability work group, where he works alongside me and leaders from local nonprofit organizations to develop a new training program for local financial coaches. Then we'll hear from Amy Durrance, Director of Law and Policy at FreeFrom. Amy earned her JD from Georgetown University Law Center, where she began advocating for rights of survivors of domestic violence as a student attorney in the Domestic Violence Clinic. Amy joined FreeFrom as a Director of Law and Policy in 2019 after relocating from Atlanta to Los Angeles. And last and certainly not least, we'll hear from Paige Diner, Senior Associate with the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund. Paige is a Senior Associate at the CFE Fund in New York, which is a national nonprofit that partners with local government to improve individual and family financial stability. In this role, Paige works with coalitions across the country to increase access to safe and affordable bank accounts and credit union accounts. Previously, Paige taught middle school in Washington, D.C. She has a master's in social work from Columbia University and a BA in sociology from Vanderbilt University. So with that, thank you again for joining us today. I'll turn it over to George to facilitate the conversation.
Thank you so much, Donisha. As Donisha mentioned, my name is George Cerda, and it's my honor to oversee the Los Angeles County Bank On program. Thank you again for joining us today in what we hope will be the first of many discussions around getting more folks banked. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout today's presentation to make sure we get all of your amazing questions answered during the Q&A. So the Los Angeles County Center for Financial Empowerment is only a few years old, as Donisha mentioned, but we recognized early on, as so many of you have, that safe and affordable banking access is absolutely critical to the financial health and stability of our residents. At that time, LA County had an unbanked rate above 10%, with people of color being disproportionately represented. Thanks to the generous support of the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund, we were able to launch our regional Bank On program and start tackling the issue head on. And guess what? It works. In just 2 years, we've seen nearly 100,000 bank-on accounts opened, and our unbanked rate improved by an entire percentage point, which is a lot in a county of 10,000 residents. So as we continue on with our mission, what's next? The first step we want to certify more accounts. As a consumer protection agency, we believe in the power of choice, and we want our residents to have as many safe banking options as possible. Thank you to the financial institutions listed here that have already certified accounts with us. Special shout out to the Financial Partners Credit Union for being our newest ally. If you're a financial institution and you're not listed here, now is the time to step up and meet the challenge. As we'll see in today's presentation, having a bank-on certified account will help address the large majority of issues that survivors and other disenfranchised groups face in the banking system. The next step in our plan is to meet folks where they are and connect banking to the issues they care about. This year, we've developed messaging that explains how a bank account can give you faster access to critical funds like your tax refund, your stimulus check, and even unemployment benefits. We're going to continue that messaging and incorporate it into more county initiatives, including youth employment, reentry and diversion, keeping folks housed, and our anti-racism efforts. Finally, the most important piece of our plan is to host more conversations like these so we can truly understand the barriers to being banked. It's not just about education and outreach, it's about access. We're seeing that there are many folks who want to be banked, but are being excluded by outdated, unnecessary, systemic barriers. With that, it's my privilege to hand it over to Amy Durrance, Director of Systems Change Initiatives at FreeFrom, to help us understand the needs of survivors and the critical role financial institutions can play in ending intimate partner violence. Take it away, Amy.
Thank you so much, George, and also Donisha and Paige. I'm so thrilled to be here today to chat with y'all. So let's just dive right in. So the number one obstacle, and you can go, sorry, George, you can go ahead and go back to that last slide. I'm going to stay on there for a minute. Sorry, I forgot to mention that to George. So the number one obstacle to safety for survivors of intimate partner violence is financial insecurity. So what that means is that financial insecurity is what's trapping survivors in abuse. At my organization, FreeFrom, we're working to dismantle that critical nexus between financial insecurity and the experience of intimate partner violence by creating pathways to financial security and long-term safety for survivors and also their families, of course. And we approach this work with certain values in mind. So first, we understand that intimate partner violence is a systemic economic issue and that solving such a systemic problem requires full societal accountability. We also understand that survivors know best what they need and how to innovate to meet those needs. So we center survivors and their experiences in everything we do. And so like many organizations earlier this year, when it became clear that COVID had come to the US and it was going to be a big issue, we internally hit pause on our programs and came together as a team to ask the question, what can we be doing right now that's going to be really responsive for survivors in the moment, really effective? Like, how can we really be supporting survivors in this moment? And we were hearing from survivors and service providers alike that what survivors needed was cash. And so we said, let's get survivors cash. So we started fundraising for what we called our safety fund. And essentially what that was is it was just a fund that was meant to give direct, unrestricted cash grants of $250 to as many survivors as we possibly could. The only eligibility requirement that we had as part of the application process was just that the applicant identify as a survivor. What we then did is added some questions as part of the application process and a follow-up survey that were completely optional. But we were very pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised, but we were very excited that we had a lot of responses. So we got a lot of data about how survivors were doing in COVID. And so we created what you're seeing seeing right here, the Survivors Know Best report, which we released in August. We'll be following up with a copy of the report, so you'll be able to see it in full. And you can go ahead and change to the next slide, George. Thank you. And so who did we reach with the safety fund? We were able to reach and gather information from over 1,300 survivors from across 36 states in Puerto Rico, and that includes in California and the LA area. Age ranged from 18 to 71. We had 8 gender identities, 7 sexualities, and over 100 unique racial and ethnic identities that were represented. And so we had a really diverse sample that we were able of information that we were able to get from survivors through this report. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, George. Thank you. So what did we find out about the impact of COVID on survivors? And you can go ahead and go to that next slide. So first, survivors, we learned from survivors what their top needs are in the moment. And as you can see from this slide, 64% of survivors identified unrestricted cash as their top need. Then we have 41% identifying utility bill relief, 35% credit or debt relief, and 31% safe employment. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. Asked survivors to identify for us the main ways that COVID was impacting them. And as you can see from the slide, these were the 4 top ways that survivors told us that that COVID was impacting them. First, escalating violence. Second, fewer financial resources that really made it harder to get or stay safe. Third, theft of stimulus checks and other COVID-19 related assistance. And fourth, slowed court proceedings, keeping survivors in contact with their harm doers and delaying potential income, like child support. And so we can move on to the next slide. So in addition to what we learned specifically about how COVID was impacting survivors, as we just kind of very quickly went over, we also learned a lot, about what we already knew, which was that survivors were financially insecure before COVID-19 happened. We already knew that was the case, but we were able to gather a lot of data about what that really looked like for survivors. So we can go to that next page. So first, we learned that 96% of our survivor grantees had experienced economic. And economic abuse occurs when a harm doer controls a survivor's access to or use of financial resources to in turn then control the survivor. And so when we're talking about economic abuse, there are really 3 broad categories of economic abuse. The first is economic restriction. And you can see from the slide that 95% of our survivor grantees experienced economic restriction. And that can look like a harm doer keeping financial information from a survivor, demanding that a survivor provide receipts for every purchase that they've made, or putting a survivor on a very strict allowance. The next broad category is what's called economic exploitation. You can see from the slide here that 94% of our survivor grantees experienced economic exploitation. And that can look like a harm doer stealing money from a survivor out of somebody's wallet or purse, or from a survivor's online bank account. It can also look like a harm doer incurring debts in the survivor's name without that survivor's consent or knowledge. And then finally, the third broad category of economic abuse is interference with a survivor's ability to earn income. And again, as you can see from the slide, 77% of our survivor grantees reported experiencing interference with their ability to earn income. And this can look a lot of different ways. We've heard of harm doers slashing survivors' tires so they can't get to work, or hiding their car keys. We've also heard survivors talk about harm doers sending harassing phone calls or otherwise to a survivor's place of employment. And so as you can see, economic abuse is an extremely prevalent problem. It's as prevalent, if not more prevalent, than physical and psychological abuse. So it's the reality for most survivors of intimate partner violence. And we can move on to the next. So in addition to just learning about the types of economic abuse that survivors were experiencing, we also were able to learn some pretty startling information about how much economic abuse was actually costing survivors. And so as you can see here, the costs are staggering. So first, survivors reported that harm doers steal on average $1,280 from them each and every month. And then in addition to that $1,280, they also restrict survivors' use of an additional $1,000. And so you might be like, well, what does that mean? For example, the harm doer and survivor could share a joint bank account. So technically, a survivor has access to those funds. But in real life, the reality is that the harm doer is forbidding the survivor from touching that money. So if you just combine those first two amounts, that's somebody's paycheck for the entire month. But in addition to that, so our survivor grantees reported that harm doers were incurring just under $16,000 of coerced or fraudulent debt in the survivors' names each year. And when I say coerced or fraudulent debt, what I'm talking about is, for example, a harm doer applying for a credit card in the survivor's name without the survivor even knowing that they're doing that, and then using that credit card to run up debts. You'll also see that survivors reported losing out on an average of $23,000 of income every year, and almost $18,000 in property damage each year. So as you can see, the experience of economic abuse, the experience of intimate partner violence, and economic abuse as a type of intimate partner violence is really financially devastating for most survivors. You can go to the next slide. And we also learned that survivors on average, from our survivor grantees, on average had less than $250 in savings and were 4 times more likely to have experienced material hardship in the past year compared to an average American adult. So again, it's financially devastating to experience intimate partner violence and economic abuse. You can go to the next slide. So in addition to learning how COVID was impacting survivors, how financially insecure survivors were even before COVID happened, we also learned some stuff about banking for survivors. And to be honest, this was information that we weren't necessarily expecting to get, but we can go ahead and go to that next slide. And what we learned from this process, I mean, this is one of those situations where we already knew that it was true, but then we really found this data to back up what we already knew to be true from working with survivors and working with service providers. Survivors don't have access to safe and protected bank accounts. And so through the safety fund, how we really learned this piece is we provided survivors with options for how they could get their fund, their $250 grant. So you can see here from the slide, were able to get it through a check in the mail, through PayPal, or through a direct deposit. So as you can see, 52% of our survivor grantees asked to get their check in the mail. Another 27% said PayPal, and only 21% said that they wanted their money to be direct deposited. And we learned that this really was for 2 reasons. And so the first is all that I just went over, that financial devastation of abuse, the financial position that survivors who are actively experiencing that type of abuse, where they are, a lot of them can't afford to stay banked because the fees and everything associated with having a bank account would essentially be more than the amount of money they have in their account. So we know that one reason that some survivors are unbanked is because they can't afford to have a bank account. The second reason is harm doers essentially have, the majority of the time, will have at least access to a survivor's personally identifying information and important documents. So what I'm talking about specifically here are things like birth certificates, social security cards, and also access to survivors' login information, email addresses, passwords, answers to verification questions. So what this means is that harm doers are essentially having unfettered access to survivors' accounts. And so survivors, either they don't want money going in there, they don't trust it because they know that their harm doer is monitoring it and will say, what's this money coming from? Why are you saving this money? Or 2, they'll just steal it. They'll take it right out of the account. And so without access to safe and protected bank accounts, that's an issue for survivors. It's an obstacle to getting to that place of financial security because they can't save money. They can't save money safely. And in fact, I personally spoke with a survivor in doing this banking work who was put on a 22 cent a day allowance by their harm doer. wasn't given any other money other than that. And so essentially what she had to do, and didn't have access to a bank account, didn't have access to a protected, safe bank account that the harm doer didn't have access to. So essentially what she was having to do was hide money, hide cash around the house until she was able to save up enough to go to Walmart, get a prepaid card, and then try and leave. But that took, as you might imagine, a long time. And it wouldn't have taken as much time for her to leave if she had had access to a bank account where she could really be saving that money more safely. And that's just one example. You know, I've spoken with several survivors who had similar stories where they were like, I didn't have a bank account. I had to find other ways to save, and it took me a really long time to save. And so we can go ahead and go to the next. Okay, so we also went beyond the safety fund to get an even better understanding from survivors about the specific challenges that they face at their banks. And thanks, George, you can click through for all of the items to come up. I forgot that these had little, you know, whatever you call it, where they swoop in from the side. So like I was saying, we went beyond our sort of limited questions with the application process for the safety fund, and did a lot of one-on-one in-depth interviews with survivors who had shared with us that they had experienced challenges with their banks. And here's a list of sort of the most common challenges that survivors identified that they were facing when they went into their banks. So as you can see, the first I've already gone over, the financial devastation of abuse makes banking unaffordable for many survivors. And I think it's important for me to pause here and just say, this financial devastation that survivors are experiencing, it's not because they made bad choices. It's not because they don't know how to, you know, manage their finances. Survivors are financially devastated because they are experiencing intentional acts of abuse and coercive tactics. So survivors really need support in getting through that financial devastation. But we know as an organization, because we've worked with so many survivors, they go on to thrive, open their own businesses, et cetera. So the financial devastation is real, but with support, survivors can move past it. So that first challenge we've covered. The second, again, we've covered, can't safely save the money they need. Also, number 3, you'll remember that I mentioned that harm doers have access to everything they need to get on survivors' bank accounts. Well, we know from survivors we've talked to that harm doers are doing that and are getting on folks' online profile, finding their new addresses, and are able to locate them that way. We also know survivors are having to repeat their story multiple times when they call in to get support from a bank, because they're speaking to different people every time they call in. Economic abuse is happening in branches, but that's because bank employees and staff aren't trained to identify and respond to intimate partner violence and economic abuse. We also know that survivors often have to leave without an ID and without a permanent address, without their ID for the reasons that I stated. A lot of times harm doers have control over IDs, and then without a permanent address, because a lot of times when folks leave, you know, they don't know where they're going necessarily. And this, without their not having their ID or a permanent address, acts as a big obstacle to opening a bank account after someone has gotten safe, to build up that financial security so they don't have to return. Also, I've already mentioned harm doers are incurring debts in survivors' names without their knowledge or consent. And as I mentioned, talking about the financial devastation piece, survivors need time to financially recover from that financial devastation of abuse without enduring further damage to their credit. We can go to the next slide. Oh, and I should mention, we did a convening last week. George was actually at that convening. And when we presented these issues that we'd learned, these challenges that we learned from survivors, you know, what they were facing when they went to their banks, we asked all of the folks that were participating in that convening we said, you know, have you either experienced this yourself as a survivor, or supported someone as a service provider who was experiencing any of these challenges? And 80% of the folks indicated that they had. So this is a really prevalent problem. And then as you'll see here on this slide, there are approximately 28.5 million survivors that are banked and underserved in the US. So not only is it a prevalent problem, it's a big problem, right? And while the scope of this problem is so enormous, so is I get like so excited about this part of when I'm talking about the banking work, because when you have such a big problem, the opportunity is so big too, right? So there's such a big opportunity here for financial institutions to help survivors keep their money protected and stay safe, because this is 28.5 million survivors whose finances can be better protected with the help of their financial institution. 28.5 million survivors that banks can support in saving the money they need to get safe faster and more easily. And then it's 28.5 million families that banks can support in building the financial security they need to permanently break that cycle of intimate partner violence. And we can go ahead and move to the next slide. And not only is there this big opportunity that always gets me really excited, but we also know that survivors would seek out this type of support if banks offered it. So this again is from the Safety Fund report, the Survivors Know Best report. We asked survivors first if they'd ever gone to banks to get support as a survivor, and 75% indicated no, that they'd never done that. And then we asked for those who had what type of support they got. So 64%, bear with me, of the 25% who have gone to seek support from their bank have indicated that they either received no help or the help that the support that they got wasn't really helpful. And 51% indicated that they would seek these services if they were available. And that number is just going to go up as banks and financial institutions, message we are prepared and ready to support our customers who are experiencing violence. So not only is it a big problem, is it a prevalent problem, it's a big opportunity, and survivors would look for the support if it were available. So this part just gets me really excited. Okay, so for the next slide. So what are we actually asking banks to do? The first 6, like I mentioned, we talked to a lot of survivors and got from them, what their challenges were. As I mentioned at the very beginning, one of the values of FreeFrom is that we really understand that survivors know best. So we work with survivors and came up with some ways to really support survivors and get rid of some of these obstacles that they were facing when they were banking. So as you'll see here, first of all, there's a total of 11, but here we've got our first 6. Number 1, offer accounts that meet BankOn's national standards. So I'm excited for Paige's presentation after mine. I was loving hearing about LA's BankOn success from George. It really is so important for survivors to be able to have access to these types of accounts, because as I've said a million times, the financial devastation that they've experienced as a result of abuse makes it such that for a lot of them, bank accounts are just not going to be accessible otherwise. So that number 1 guideline is offering those BankOn national standard accounts. Also keeping survivors' contact information confidential and secure, implementing enhanced fraud protections on survivors' accounts, offering safety accounts for survivors. And essentially what those are would be accounts that don't show up on your online profile. Instead, you have to go into a branch location. That way we can really help stave off a lot of that fraud that's committed because harm doers have access to survivors' online bank accounts often. Then you'll see number 5, designate an internal team to handle survivor accounts. So that way, whenever a survivor calls in, they won't be speaking to a different person every time. You'd have an internal team designated to deal with those kinds of situations that had all the knowledge on what to do in those situations. 6, hire FreeFrom to train bank staff to detect, prevent, and respond to economic abuse. And we can go to that next slide. And then for our last 5, allow survivors to open accounts with ID and address alternatives. And we chatted about why that's important to help survivors open those bank accounts once they've left. 8, offer interest-free deferred payment emergency loans to survivors. And again, this is really the reason that it's important that these be interest-free and deferred payment, is that, as we know, survivors don't have that cash they need to get safe. But in giving them that cash, we don't want to cause them further damage. And so giving them that deferral period will allow them to be financially recovering, so that then when those payments come due, they're able to make every payment. They're not enduring further damage to their credit. 9, refrain from reporting defaults on coerced and fraudulent debt to credit reporting agencies. Again, this is meant as a way to preserve survivors' credit scores as they're dealing with, and in this case, coerced and fraudulent debt is debt that the survivor didn't incur anyway. 10, offer flexible repayment plans for survivors in default. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then finally, provide survivor paid leave and other resources to employees. And we added this one in because, you know, right now today, 1 in 4 women and nearly 1 in 2 trans folks will experience severe intimate partner violence in the United States. With numbers like that, if you're a financial institution, you're employing survivors. And so this is a way to sort of, you know, for financial institutions, not only to be supporting their customers who are experiencing abuse, but also their employees who are experiencing abuse. Okay. And so all of these things that we're asking financial institutions to do to support survivors, it's good news. It's work that's already really being done in the realm of elder financial exploitation. So you can see from the slide here, I won't go through all of them, but banks and financial institutions are already creating these programs and policies to ensure that their elder customers aren't being taken advantage of. They're not being victims of financial exploitation. So what we're asking isn't really anything that new. And then I should also mention, you know, at FreeFrom, we are bringing this innovative work to the United States, but there's already been success in other countries. So Australia, New Zealand, and the UK are already doing so much. The financial institutions there are already doing a lot to support survivors. So this can be done. It is possible. And we're just trying to bring this innovative work here to the United States. We can go to the next. So getting involved. How do you get involved? You're like, Amy, that was all great, but what can I do? First things first, if you are a bank or a financial institution, of course, we would love it for you to commit to implementing some or all of FreeFrom's survivor safety banking guidelines. And we would be there every step of the way to help and support in thinking through that implementation process and maybe tweaking some of the guidelines to better fit, you know, your particular financial institution. We're of course open to that. If you're an organization or an advocate, you can sign on in public support of FreeFrom Survivor Safety Banking Initiative. So essentially just saying, you know, this is a good idea. This is a great cause. We publicly support, and we would love to have your public support. And then if you're an individual, if you've experienced some of these challenges yourself as a result of intimate partner violence or economic abuse, when you've tried to bank, if you feel comfortable doing it, you can share your experience with us so that when we can just continue to build this case for why this is an important thing for financial institutions to do to really support their customers. Or if you don't want to share, and this can also be an you can advocate for your bank where you bank to implement some of these guidelines. And you can go to the next slide, George. For any and all of those action items, I am the person to contact. So there's my contact information there. Amy Durance, Director of Systems Change Initiatives at FreeFrom, and there is my email address. I would be tickled pink to talk to any and all of y'all on this convening about how you can get involved in supporting the initiative, or if you represent a financial institution, how we can start going down that road of hopefully implementing some of these guidelines. Like that, again, would go so far in helping millions of survivors in the US start building that financial security they need to stay safe. So with that, I'm very excited, I think, to turn it over to Paige.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Amy, for all of that helpful information. It really highlights the intersection of financial health, economic abuse, and ways we can support survivors of intimate partner violence by doing things like offering these safe and affordable accounts and making sure that financial institutions are prepared to serve survivors. So I'm really happy to jump into a little bit more information about banking access, the Bank on National movement, and the certification process. So what are safe and affordable accounts? Why do they matter? How do you as a financial institution offer one of these accounts, and just walk you through that process. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that banking access matters. We've just heard a ton about that information. George and Danisha shared a little bit of context from the LA perspective. And the FDIC recently released their updated numbers of the unbanked rates in the United States. In 2019, there were 5.4% of US households that were unbanked. And of course, 2019 was right before COVID hit. So it will be really interesting to learn how this has changed even further during the last 8 months or so in COVID, when people's financial health has been affected by the environment. This number did decrease in 2019 from 2017, where it was closer to 7%. So that's really exciting. As Amy said, there's opportunity. And as George said, this work is working. So just like in LA County, the number decreased, it also decreased nationally. Still, though, millions of people remain outside of the financial mainstream, and this is especially pronounced for communities of color. The average unbanked person spends 5% of their net income on unnecessary fees, amounting to up to 40% over a lifetime, a significant amount of money. At the CFE Fund, we not only lead various banking access initiatives across the country, but we also have a program called Financial Empowerment Centers, where we work with city and county governments to lead financial counseling programs that offer free one-on-one financial counseling as a public service. And I bring this up in the context of banking because we, a few years ago, did an evaluation of 5 of the cities in which we have this program and found that unbanked financial counseling clients were half as likely to increase their savings and over a third less likely to establish a new credit score than those who were banked during the counseling process. Similarly, unbanked financial counseling clients who became banked during that process, so as a result of the counseling, were almost 8 times more likely to increase their savings relative to those who never became banked during that process of working with a financial counselor. On the next slide, you can see a snapshot of the Bank on National movement. So of course, we're focused on LA County here. But just like LA County is doing this great work with the financial institutions and community-based programs in the larger county, we're also working across the country with coalitions in cities, counties, regions, states, with tribal governments to increase access to safe and affordable financial products. So both banks and credit unions that are offering certified accounts. We'll talk about what that means to offer a certified account, what that looks like. But we currently have over 60 accounts that are certified nationally, offering these accounts in all of their branches and anywhere that they have a footprint. Wherever there are these financial institutions, you'll also find these bank on coalitions. So just like in LA County, there are coalitions across the country. You can see them on here represented by the green dots. These coalitions are made up of 4 key buckets. So we have, of course, the financial institutions. So the banks and credit unions that are offering the safe and affordable accounts to consumers in the region. Then also community-based programs. So this is really important. As a key trusted voice in the community, it's the service providers, nonprofits, community organizations that can serve as that pipeline to reach consumers where they are, where it's relevant, where banking really matters in that moment. Coalitions also typically have a local government representation. So in LA County's case, the coalition is run by a local government entity. In some of these coalitions across the country, the coalition is run by a nonprofit, a United Way, or someone working really closely with local government, but it's not always led by the local government themselves. And then lastly, consumer advocates, FDIC representation, local government, banking regulators. We have coalitions that have a key component and membership base featuring these representatives from banking regulators to really champion this work and share it nationally. On the next slide, here we are. So if you look at the Bank on National Account Standards, what are they? What's they look like? There's a ton of information. I'm definitely not going to read them all to you, but we will share them after this webinar so that you have access to them. We've recently updated the standards for 2021 and 2022. So they're fresh and ready to be certified for your products. But if you do look at it, the main things are three aspects. So any account that meets these standards are safe, affordable, and functional. So what does that mean? Without, again, diving into too many details on the standards themselves, looking at the safety aspect. So these accounts are safe because they do not have overdraft capability. So any account meeting the Bank on National Account standards cannot allow for overdraft at all. Typically, financial institutions will meet this feature of the standards by making it a checklist checking account. And the idea behind this is the account is inherently safe. So it's not just safe for the consumer, because we all know that from the FDIC report, from a lot of what was shared today, that a lot of people feel that they don't have enough money to open an account. And that's a key barrier to account access. When an overdraft fee hits an account because of a swipe at the coffee shop where you didn't have sufficient funds in the account and you're hit with a $35 fee, and then perhaps a few hours later one of your bills goes through and you're hit with another $35 fee, you're in this debt cycle that feels oppressive and overwhelming, and often leads people to decide to just leave the banking mainstream and utilize alternative financial services instead. So any account that does meet the Bank on National Account standards, most importantly, cannot allow for overdraft. In that same vein, there cannot be any insufficient funds fees. So when you do make that swipe and you didn't have sufficient funds in the account, and the account is, or the purchase is declined, there is no penalty for that. There is no fee. Additionally, some other fees, we call them a la carte fees, dormancy fees. So there are no dormancy or inactivity fees on this account. So if somebody is, for example, in seasonal employment and they work for 3 months and then there's a 3-month break, there is no fee associated with that. That way your money can remain in a safe place and it's protected, which, you know, Amy just shared a lot about how important it is that the money is in a protected location while people cycle in and out of employment or in and out of different situations. The accounts are also affordable. So we understand that financial institutions have to make money as well. And in talking with a lot of consumers themselves, financial institutions, consumer advocates, we wanted to make this as feasible and helpful, not only for consumers, but also for financial institutions. Rather than these a la carte fees that pop up throughout the month that are very hard to budget in, any account that meets the national account standards has a $5 or less monthly fee. So the idea behind this is it's easier to budget in. You know that this fee is on the horizon. You will not be hit with, you know, multiple fees throughout the month for different activity on the card. Additionally, there's a low minimum opening deposit, so $25 or less to open the account. Again, this addresses that barrier of entry. So accounts that have a $150 opening deposit or maybe a minimum balance requirement often keep people out of the financial mainstream and keep people out of the opportunity to open that account. So it's really important to remove that barrier of entry and make sure the account is accessible to everyone. And then lastly, the accounts are functional. So anything you would do with another account or with your alternative financial services, you will be able to do with an account that meets the standards. Paying bills for free online, making deposits and withdrawals, using it for apps like Uber and Venmo, transferring money. In some cases, some financial institutions will offer for free money orders per month in lieu of the online bill pay. So there is some flexibility, but the idea is that by being an account holder in one of these safe and affordable accounts, you have the ability to make all of the financial decisions and actions throughout the day that can really keep you on top of your finances. We will share in the chat a little bit more information on the certification itself, and in that is a link to the standards. I'll just post that right here. So you're welcome to browse that and get in touch. But if we look at the next slide, So what is in it for the financial institution? So of course, you're here today because you care. You want to serve survivors. You want to be helpful. You care about this issue. You care about these people, and you, as a financial institution, it's important to know how to best serve the community, what the best practices are. But looking beyond this partnership, what is in it for the financial institutions? So here you can see these seals. One, you get a seal, it's great. But beyond that, the community opportunities are just really ripe. So as you saw in that map before, there are coalitions across the country that are connecting people to these safe and affordable accounts. And the idea is that it's really moving beyond just a marketing phase. So it's not just coalitions saying that there are these safe and affordable accounts, go ahead and open them. Hope you find the right account, hope you find the right branch. Now coalitions are really creating a pipeline. We'll talk about it in just a moment, but integrating banking access into existing programs in the community allows for this consumer base for financial institutions. So if you're working with a workforce program or an agency serving survivors, that's an opportunity for you to have direct marketing to people who could benefit from the account. Additionally, there's banking access programming, there's data collection, which we can talk about, and then also in some cases there's CRA credit as well for not only participating in a bank on coalition, but also offering an account that is safe and affordable. You can go to the next slide. In COVID, banking access was more important than ever before. We saw immediately how important it was to have online account opening, to have access to your funds. Nobody wants to go to the check casher and to a branch and risk exposure right now or wait in long lines, and especially with things like unemployment benefits and stimulus payments, it was really crucial that people had access to their funds and ability to receive these deposits. So we recently created this link you see here, covidbanking.joinbankon.org. It is a consumer-friendly landing page featuring the 11 certified accounts that do offer full online account opening. This is linked on the FDIC and IRS websites. So when people are signing up for their economic stimulus funds, there is an opportunity, if you do not have an account, to actually get direct connection to the accounts that are certified. Looking at the next slide, just share that with you. So I want to be mindful of time, but I quickly want to share that a little snapshot of the bank on market. So we recently started working with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis to collect data from the accounts that are certified. So 10 reporting institutions shared data with us last year. It was our second round of data collection, all about the accounts that were certified and the account activity, account openings, closings, that sort of thing. There have been 3 million accounts open to date. And the number that makes me most excited and really demonstrates this opportunity is that 75% that you see on the screen. So 75% of the accounts that were opened in 2018 were opened by customers who were brand new to that financial institution. So what that means is that either somebody did not have an account at all and chose to open their first account with that financial institution, or perhaps they even switched accounts from a different financial institution, but something about the BankOn certified account that meets those standards drew the customer into the institution for that product. So that was really promising and demonstrates that opportunity. Looking at the next slide. So I mentioned before that coalitions have moved beyond this marketing phase and really putting the onus on consumer to find the branch, find the right account, and ask for it in everybody's busy lives. Now we've identified touch points in the community and are working with coalitions to integrate banking access into existing programs, existing social services. So in some cases, this could be a summer youth employment program, which LA also runs and has banking access built into. It could be adult workforce. So is there a workforce program where people are receiving stipends or subsidized employment? Great, that's a banking opportunity. Is it, youth aging out of the foster care system, reentry, survivors of intimate partner violence like we're talking about right now? Is it college students receiving their work study checks? Are they still getting it by paper check? This is a bankable opportunity. So we are working with coalitions to identify and to build these pipelines to really meet people where they are. And then lastly, on the next slide, the idea with these program integrations is that it's not just enough to open an account, and it's also not just enough to provide financial education, but to couple these things together is to really welcome people into the banking mainstream. So by integrating this into existing programs, we can provide the information, provide the education, but also provide that opportunity to open the account and then to actually use and learn how to use the account through things like direct deposit and financial counseling or coaching. So if you go to the last slide, that's all I have for you today, but I would love to hear from any of the financial institutions or community programs who are interested in certification. You can see my email right there, joinbankon.org/certify if you want to get right to that information. I will turn it back over for question and answers. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can pull up the Q&A as well as our chat box just to make sure that we've answered everyone's questions before we head out. There was one question for Amy regarding if she was aware of any coalitions or movements like this happening in St. Louis.
Great question. Great question. So, and I'm sorry, I should have said this more directly in my presentation, but we are kind of at the very beginning of this new initiative. So right now we've talked to a lot of banks. We've been trying to talk to every bank we can. And we do have some that are interested in being trained by FreeFrom, but we haven't gotten to the stage yet where folks are actually implementing these guidelines. That's what we're trying to get. So unfortunately, the answer to your question is no, but please contact me. I'd love to talk to you in more detail about ways that we can work together to maybe advocate for banks in your area to think about implementing some of these guidelines.
Okay. Going through from Jacob, which accounts can be opened online? I know a number of the banks, about half of them that we work with, have allowed for online opening access. So I think it depends on which coalition you're referring to, but Jacob, if you'd like to know which ones in the LA area allow for online bank opening, definitely feel free to reach out to me and I can answer that question for you.
And I'll put in the chat on that COVID banking page that we made. There's the links to the 11 that are available for online account opening nationally. Awesome.
Perfect. From Alicia, we have fantastic work. They're giving me, I have such a tiny little box. Let me try and expand it. Okay. Fantastic work being done. I work with nonprofits serving victims of human trafficking and or IPV. How can I get my clients connected with banks and with the safety funds and the Bank On Coalition?
So I can answer about the safety fund. And just another clarifying piece, the safety fund is really coming out of FreeFrom. We've fundraised for it. It's a lot of independent individual donors, in fact, and we're actually getting started to do another round. So in the follow-up email that y'all are going to get, that George is going to send out, I'll also send some information about how you can track when that next round of safety fund is going to be open. So if you're helping folks that could really use that unrestricted cash grant, you can show them where to apply once that is open back up. And as far as get clients connected with Bank On. I think that is with George and Paige. We definitely are incorporating those Bank On standards and love to be partnered with these amazing organizations. But those are going to be the folks that are going to be able to put you in the right direction for your clients in locating those specific types of accounts, I think.
Absolutely. Alicia, if you're located in LA County, you can reach out to me and we can make sure that you have collateral materials to share with your clients regarding Bank On. If you happen to be in another area, then hopefully we can work with Paige to identify the Bank On leads for your area.
Oh, and also, Alicia, I would just love to talk to you offline about how we can work together in moving this initiative forward more broadly. So.
Yeah.
And I saw a question, I saw a question up higher from Blair asking to speak in more detail about hiring FreeFrom staff to train bank staff, and could other agencies hire FreeFrom to get training in this? I'll answer that second question first. Yes, 1,000 times yes. So reach out to me, we can chat about that. As far as what it would look like, we have the curriculum for this training, right? We know the content, but what we want to do, we're assuming and understanding that one financial institution internally can look completely different from another financial institution, and how they train their staff, how all that works. So what we want to do is really make it a collaborative effort where we've got this content. Tell us how we can make it best work for your staff. So we don't have anything set in stone about what that would look like. It's sort of meant to be a collaborative process. But Blair, I can send you, I'm working on an offerings menu for training. And so I can share that with you once I have it. But it's going to be a very collaborative process, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And then Paige, I think this question might be for you. Is there a space on the CFE or Bank On website where we can find a registration of the financial counselors or banks that are part of the coalition?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different things in there. If you're looking for the national list of all the financial institutions that are certified, that's also on joinbankon.org. And it's on that coalition map link that I just put in the chat. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see the full list of the 60 certified accounts. For the financial counselors and the financial empowerment centers, that is on our website, cfefund.org. I'll put it in the chat. You can see all of the cities that we work in. And if there are any coalitions or FECs that anyone is interested in getting in touch with, I can make that direct connection.
Great. And then I see a question from Sarah. Sarah asks, does a survivor need to live near a coalition area to apply for an account through a Bank On institute?
I can just say from the Bank On side of things, that's a really great question, and one of the things we're most proud of. The financial institutions offering the certified accounts are not just offering them in the areas where the coalition is. So it's not like an LA County specific product that only LA County residents can open with a referral. If a financial institution is serving LA County and they're also serving Waco, Texas, then that product is available in Waco, Texas branches as well. So anywhere that financial institution has a branch, they have that account available.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect way to summarize it. Is anyone else seeing any other questions that they might have gotten personally instead of in the chat? Or if anyone has any remaining questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A before we wrap up. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that you've learned some of the actions we can all take to serve survivors and end intimate partner violence and just get people banked in general. A copy of today's presentation will be shared with everyone that's registered, and a video recording of today's presentation is going to be shared on our website by next week. I'll be sure to include a link to that website in the email that I send out. Please be sure to fill out our survey that's going to pop up once you log out of today's webinar. There's an option to let us know if you would like follow-up from FreeFrom to introduce their banking guidelines at your institution or to work more closely with them. Thanks again to all of our speakers today for joining us. It was really great. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a good one.
Thank you, Danisha and George, for having us today. Bye.